Hi, my name's Iain Robson, and this is my story about when a local patch becomes an obsession. Back in 2019, I was on the Straits of Gibraltar for the annual spectacle of raptor migration, photographing fantastic birds of prey like the short-toed eagle. Whilst I was there, I managed to enjoy the other birds that inhabit the area, including hundreds of these black-winged stilts. I soon found out, though, that this had turned up on my local patch of Druridge Pools, black-winged stilt. New for the patch, new for me. I was devastated. It didn't hang around, and I didn't see it when I returned. It would have been a new bird for the patch. So this is my patch, Druridge. Why? Why Druridge? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why and what makes a good patch and the pitfalls of patch birding. So my local patch, Druridge, is in the middle of the 8 miles of Druridge Bay. Zooming in a little bit, you can see Druridge Pools marked on the map. And zooming in a bit more, that's my patch. Druridge Hamlet, Druridge Pools, Druridge Links. This is how it looked in 1996. You can see that the bushes in the foreground, for those that know the patch, haven't really matured. The site was still quite young after open cast coal mining. And this is really how I remember Druridge Pools, Druridge Links. When I first started to go back there, I just started working at Druridge Bay Country Park. My passion for bird watching had been rekindled after a lapse in my teenage years, like so many other bird watchers. And mid-90s, I found myself spending more time here. But at the time, I would also go to Cresswell Pond, East Chevington, the Coquet Estuary, local area generally. But this was one of the places I would go to. Things changed in 2002. Alan Tilmouth, a local birdwatcher, started a patch competition, and each of the competitors, if you like, would choose a local patch, and I decided to take part and needed a patch. I thought about Cresswell or East Chevington, but they were really well watched. So I thought, well, why not Druridge Pools? It's a place I go to regularly. It's a good spot. So in 2002, the patch competition kicked off. And little did I know that another local birdwatcher, Stuart Sexton, would also choose Druridge Pools as his local patch. So it was a bit of friendly rivalry. We both had Druridge Pools as our patch. It spurred us on, and to be honest, we didn't rarely missed a day in that year. One of us would be on the patch every day, pretty much. It was an amazing year, and we saw a lot of species. To sum up how seriously it got, one of these, a purple heron, turned up at nearby East Chevington. A rare bird for England, certainly a rare bird for Northumberland, and all of the local birdwatchers were up at Chevington to see this bird. It was a new bird for a lot of people. Stuart and I went and thought, this is a big bird. We could probably see this from our patch at Druridge. It's only a mile and a bit away. The rules of the patch competition were that if you were stood in your patch, it didn't matter. As long as you were stood there, it didn't matter where the bird was. So we zoomed round at Druridge, clambered up to the top of the big dune with our telescopes, set our scopes on East Chevington, and there it was, flying around. purple heron on the patch list, much to the derision of the other bird watchers in the competition. We did well that year. We came second and third. Stuart beat me just. And really, that was it. That cemented Druridge as my local patch. And to be honest, since then, I haven't gone very far since. People often say to birdwatchers, have you been far? And I'll say, well, not since 2002, and it's not far from the truth. So what makes a good local patch? Why is Druridge such a good local patch? Well, it's not just about the rare birds like purple herons or whatever else. Pinning down a collared dove in most years is difficult. I haven't seen collared dove for 2 years at Druridge. And that's the challenge of patch watching. What's common to most people some birds are really rare on a patch like Druridge. So a little bit of history about the site and why it makes such a good patch. Well, it's a restored, most of it is a restored open cast coal site. This is it in 1972. It's the Radar North Extension F. You can see here, Druridge, the Chibham Preceptory, Low Chibham Preceptory, and this is High Chibham Farm. The dunes are intact, they weren't open casted. This is how it looked in 1996, post open cast coal mining and post restoration. Northumberland Wildlife Trust took on the site and they designed it as a nature reserve. And you can see that these are the fields in the front of the budge fields. The reason they're called the budge fields is because this little hide here was sponsored by the mining company R.J. Budge. It was the Budge hide. And as a result, these fields became known as the Budge Fields. It's a question I'm asked a lot. Why are the Budge Fields called the Budge Fields? Well, now you know. So at Druridge, you get 2 reserves for the price of 1. You get Druridge Pools, which is the Wildlife Trust Reserve, and you get Druridge Links, which is the National Trust Nature Reserve. What's not to like? So this is a little map of my patch as it stands now. Slightly extended it from 2002, taken in 2 areas of dune habitat here. And this map's from my blog, which I'll come on to later. And this is just to help people to know where the different areas of the patch are. So when people talk about the budge fields or the turn and circle, this is a little annotated map. So back to the budge fields. So the budge fields are a grazing marsh, a coastal grazing marsh, freshwater system. There's no tidal inundation on the budge fields. And they were designed for 2 purposes. Firstly, wintering waders and wildfowl, and secondly, for breeding waders. So the meadows are, the grasslands are grazed. This was a really good year with lots of cows. And grazing is absolutely essential. It really wants to be down to bare grass, basically, very low sward in the autumn and ahead of the breeding season as well. Particularly for the winter, as I said, it's a site for the reserve is managed for wintering wildfowl like widgeon and teal. They're the 2 main species we get in the winter time, and also for wintering waders. So you can see lapwing in the sky there. There's waterfowl on the pools, and there'll be curlew amongst those, and redshank. And even in the winter nowadays, black-tailed godwit never used to winter on the site, and now regularly see black-tailed godwit and ruff wintering on the budge fields. And in the areas like the beast from the east, it can bring in all sorts of other species. There's fieldfares here, there's woodcock on here. But when it warms up a bit and the lapwings hang around a little bit longer, and the golden plover, but when it warms up a little bit more, spring's in the air and the lapwings start to display, the wintering birds move off to their breeding territories. Some of the lapwings will go, a lot of the lapwings will go, but 6 or 7 pairs a year stay and breed on the budge fields in a normal year. And this is what they look like in their breeding finery. There's no nicer bird. So most years we try and ring the lapwing chicks from the budge fields, and they do okay. But obviously there's predation, carrying crows and fox, and the site isn't proofed against these species at all. So they take that chance. Other breeding waders on the site include snipe, redshank, curlew occasionally try to breed, normally in the silage fields next to the reserve, and sometimes they get chicks away. Last year, a new breeding bird for the patch was avocet. It was long overdue. Haven't bred at Cresswell Pond for many years, but it was nice to see. We had 3 pairs, 2 were successful, raising 3 chicks. That was quite nice. It's not just waders in the breeding season. Gargony breed occasionally. I think probably 3 or 4 in the last 20 years. They're very difficult to detect as a breeding species. Only occasionally you see the adults with the young. More regularly, the feral greylag population in the area and the feral Canada goose population breed on the site. This is what it looks like in autumn with black-tailed godwits and redshank and ruff and dunlin and all sorts of other waders passing through. Occasionally it does turn up a rare bird. So this is a stilt sandpiper in 2014, which attracted a big crowd. Long-billed dowitcher, this one wintered over 2015 and 2016. The pools have held a huge number of rare waders over the years. And things like pectoral sandpiper and American wader are virtually annual these days. As well as waders, the rarer egrets and herons, particularly great egret is another one that's nearly annual nowadays. And occasionally we get some rare waterfowl. This bicol teal is a bit of a controversial bird in that it arrived and basically overstayed its welcome and raised suspicions in the BBRC, the British Birds Rarities Committee, and they binned it. Basically, it stayed too long, and its rare, its native, sorry, its wild credentials were dismissed. Such a shame. It was a great bird, and I'd love to have been on my list. But that's not the most controversial bird that the site's ever had. This is slender-billed curlew, or was it? Found by the late Tim Cleaves in 1998. I didn't see this bird. I was at university and turned up on the Friday, the first day it wasn't seen. It was on the list and off the list. It was binned by the Rarities Committee. It still causes great discussion to this day. I still like to think that it was a slender-billed curlew, even though I didn't see it. So alongside the budge fields, there's a shelter belt, a coniferous mainly shelter belt. It's really too big, too tall, and it should be felled to reduce the edge effect for the breeding waders. But it does hold a heronry, so it would be a shame to do that and lose the heronry. And most years we go along and ring the heron chicks. It averages between 12 and 13 pairs of herons in there every year. So back in 2014, those little egrets were hanging around on the budge fields all spring and all of the early summer, and my suspicions were raised. And I thought, could they be breeding on the site? It was long expected that they were breeding somewhere in Northumberland, but I hadn't seen them certainly breeding at Druridge Pools. So I went for a look. So on the left-hand side, you can see a big green egg. That's a grey heron egg. On the right-hand side, that's a little egret egg. It's about half the size. There was white feathers around, so my suspicions were right. But I wasn't to leave it alone there. I had to have a better look. So I decided to climb up the tree. Now, I just presumed they'd been nesting in an old heron's nest. I was wrong. As I approached the heron's nest, as I climbed up the tree, I glanced across the branch, and there was this kind of flimsy nest, not much bigger than a wood pigeon nest, and there was 2 little egret chicks sat on the nest. So that was the first breeding record for Northumberland, confirmed. And we managed to ring the chicks that year, and they bred in the subsequent years and ring some chicks. But they stopped breeding around about the year of the beast from the east, and have never bred since, which is a shame. But the really little egret as a species got a real clattering in the year from the beast from the east. This is a fledged juvenile. It wasn't one that we ringed, but you can see the feather scale on the bill and the kind of just overall kind of fluffiness of the bird that shows that's a juvenile bird, probably fledged locally. The shelter belts is good for other species, but all of the shelter belts on the bay are good for long-eared owls, and there's always a pair breeding somewhere on Druridge Bay. So the other wetland habitat that we've got on the patch is the big pool, Druridge Pool. It was formed as part of the open cast coal mining operations, and it is what it is really. It's a big, deep pool. Seemingly there wasn't enough material, wasn't enough muck to fill the hole, so that's why we ended up with such a big pool. It's 30 foot deep at its deepest point. And as I say, the water levels can't be controlled, so that's what it is. It's a big, deep pool. The benefit of it is it rarely freezes in winter. So when all of the pools are frozen, Druridge Pools normally has some open water. However, Beast from the East, even Druridge Pool froze over. You can see these mallards skating around on the deepest part. It's a good place for breeding tufted duck. Great crested grebe breed most years. And it's also a good place for shoveler. Shoveler is a rare breeding bird in Northumberland. It only breeds at a couple of sites, and Druridge Pools is one of them. And every year there's shoveler chicks. I love the chicks, the ducklings' funky long bills, fantastic birds. This reed bed in the corner of the site's been developing over the years, and as reed warblers have moved north, their distributions moved north, they've colonized the reed bed. Once upon a time, you had to go to Gosforth Park to see reed warblers, but now they're a common, widespread breeding species, and there's something like 10 or 12 pairs at Druridge now. So the last piece of habitat that I'm going to talk about is the bushes. These when they were planted here, you can see they were planted to actually hide what was going to be car parks that were never ever built, and they form this barrier between the road and the pools. They're really too high. It should be a low scrubby belt, but some of the older trees have gotten in the way and are really high. So here you see some National Trust volunteers out coppicing the trees, and this is great. It's great for particularly for warblers, the breeding warblers on site. So I've done some territory mapping work and found that the warblers prefer the freshly coppiced areas, and they'll be more concentrated in those. So the warblers we get on site, all are common, really common breeding warblers of Northumberland. We see willow warbler, white throat breed in reasonable numbers. And the bushes are also where we do our bird ringing. So bird ringing's been going on site since 2003, and we ring most years from May through until November. And warblers are really our target species. Sedge warblers breed in good numbers. Grasshopper warblers less so, but you know, certainly 2 or 3 pairs on the patch a year. And we also catch migrant warblers. Garden warbler are regular, and increasingly regular are things like yellow-browed warblers. Unfortunately, not so regular are these fellas, wood warblers, just a decreasing species in the east of the country completely, and in Northumberland, really scarce. And to see them on passage is even scarcer on the coast. I've only ever caught one, and this was it. So back in 2014, we were ringing Druridge, and I checked the nets and found what looked to be superficially like a reed warbler in the net, not uncommon. But its yellow feet and yellow claws alerted me to something, and I thought, yellow feet and yellow claws, this is interesting. Could this be marsh warbler? We took it back to the car, did all the checks on it, measured it many times, and it was a marsh warbler. So I went back on my next net round, checked the same nets, and there's the same, well, a yellow-footed warbler, Acrocephalus warbler in the net. So expected it to be the same bird flown back in, but when I extracted it, it wasn't ringed, and we had a pair. This bird was a female. It had a brood patch. We give it a code 3, which means it's sitting on eggs. So this was the first breeding record of marsh warbler for Northumberland, and Northumberland's still doing all right for marsh warblers. It's we've had suspected breeding at Druridge Pools again, but not recently at all. But they're a interesting species, certainly on the coast. When the weather turns in the autumn, particularly, the site can be great for bringing in rare birds, which is always exciting. It's not what we ring for, but it is exciting. So that year was the Morpeth flood year, for those that can remember that, and we caught wryneck that year. Some of the other birds here's a red-breasted flycatcher we caught one September. And the later they are in the year, the rarer they are. This is probably the rarest bird we've ever caught. This is a Rad's warbler, and you can see it attracted quite a big crowd, the Rad's warbler. So away from the nature reserves, the rest of the patch is farmland. It's generally wet farmland in the wintertime, so it's great for other birds, geese, waders as well, kind of as an extension to the reserve almost. So my walk around the patch will take in the farmland. It takes in Chibborn Preceptory, which is this scheduled ancient monument that was protected during the open cast coal mining operations. And then I head from there down the track to the farm, down to High Chibborn Farm. And High Chibborn Farm's a place we've spent some time. We've had barn owl boxes up there for 10 or 12 years, and ring barn owl chicks most years there. The boxes are inside the buildings now because that's what the barn owls prefer. And another species that seems to do all right on Druridge Bay. So I head back from there along the road, which takes me to Druridge Farm. It's no longer a working farm; it's a barn conversion. And again, the fields around here can be great for things like pink-footed goose. Little Owl was a character for those of you who know the patch. You'll have seen the photographers lined up taking photographs of the Little Owls. Certainly drew a crowd, and they bred in the buildings until recently. This little patch of trees in the corner of the site is known as the plantation. It's a mixture of pine and sycamore, and it's these are the only trees on the site that predate the open cast coal mine. And it's a little bit of a feature for the site, and it brings in some interesting birds. It's the only place where coal tit breed, and in fact they were a new breeding bird for the patch this year as well. Previously limited to kind of autumn passage and winter. Across the road from that, there's some nice bushes of elderberry and willow, and they've had some good birds. The elderberry brings in blackcaps, garden warblers, and very occasionally a barred warbler like this. Back to the dunes. The dunes are managed by the National Trust as Druridge Links Nature Reserve, and they're a marram-dominated dune system. Floristically quite interesting. There's at southern end particularly, there's some scattered sycamores and hawthorns, which are always worth a check. The dunes themselves hold birds like breeding linnet are quite common. Metapipits are very common, although declining now, and I think that's down to the levels of disturbance there, particularly with dogs and dog walkers. Stone chats, about 3 pairs. Breed most years and can have 3 broods of chicks, so they do really well on the site. And it's still also a really good place for grey partridge. 2 or 3, 4 maybe pairs of grey partridge in a year, but really good for wintering birds. You easily see 20 to 25 birds in the winter. Occasionally the bushes will attract a rare bird like this red-backed shrike a couple of years ago. So it was a male in the spring, and he was singing. It was fantastic. It was like being in Poland. So I said the dunes are quite interesting floristically. A really good dune system for flowers, and the flowers then attract lots of invertebrates, and particularly butterflies like this common blue. Small copper or a bird that are common, a butterfly even, that are common on the site, and dark green fritillaries are regular, and it's one of the best sites in southeast Northumberland for dark green fritillary. The ragwort that grows in the dunes attracts the day-flying moths, both cinnabar moth and the burnet moths. This is narrow-bordered 5-spot burnet, and the caterpillars of the cinnabar moth attract cuckoos. Juvenile cuckoos here in the autumn, sorry, that they come and feed on the caterpillars. So the botanists in the audience will be horrified probably at this site. This is what the dunes outside of the nature reserve look like in the winter, where the farmer grazes cattle and then supplementary feeds the cattle on the dunes. It's basically hard standing, and to the average, or to a botanist, this is probably horrific. But in the great makeup of Druridge Bay, it creates a mosaic. You have your botanically rich dunes that are managed well, and you have areas like this, but it's all part of the mosaic. And these areas are fantastic for wintering birds. Huge finch flocks, mixed flocks of birds, finches, tree sparrows, yellowhammers, reed buntings, all sorts of things. But particularly twite. And I was just on the patch 2 days ago and saw a flock of 140 twite used in this area. So the twite feed on the weedy, these weedy plants that grow in the dunes, and then once the plants have gone, the cattle have grazed those plants down. The supplementary feeding, the haylage and the silage contains arable weed seeds, grassland weed seeds, come in and they support those finches and buntings over the winter, and the birds stay around all winter on this area. So the dunes are also my perch for one of my favorite pastimes, which is a good sea watch. Quite happy to spend 6 or 7 hours on a good day's sea watching from my little perch in the dunes here. So during the summertime, you get the birds from Coconut Island, things like sandwich terns and the rarer roseate tern come into the bay to feed, as do the auks. This is a winter bird. Auks, guillemots and razorbills around all year, of course. But it's really the autumn, late summer and autumn days when the wind comes out the north and it whips the North Sea up and gannets are coming in really close. And those are the days that bring in the rare seabirds. Druridge Pools isn't the best sea watching point in the world. It's in the middle of the bay, so quite often the birds are distant. But I've got a good list from my patch. It's certainly not a good headland site like Newbiggin or Snab Point, but it's spectacular nonetheless. Big flocks of sea duck, like these common scoters coming through. The terns attract Arctic skuas. We also get the other rarer skuas coming into the bay in the autumn. As the autumn progresses, passage waterfowl, geese and ducks. These are barnacle geese heading through on their way to the Solway. But perhaps the biggest spectacle of all actually is the autumn and winter common gull roost. So up to 6,500 common gulls can come in off the fields, off the adjacent fields, and they roost on the beach or the sea, often bringing in things like Mediterranean gulls with them, but a huge spectacle. Each summer we try to ring storm petrels, and we have done most years. In fact, we've never failed yet, touch wood, to catch any on any of our nocturnal storm petrel missions. So we set nets up in the night, in the middle of the night, on the beach and play storm petrel noises out to sea, and the storm petrels come into the nets. Really good value in terms of ringing effort, because we get quite a lot of recaptures, and it helps us to find out more about this species, which is really mythical kind of species. But we've had recoveries from the Faroe Islands and from Ireland, from all over Scotland. On 2 occasions, we've ringed the larger cousin of the storm petrel, the Leach's storm petrel, and this is this. So we get quite an audience as well. People come out to see these birds being ringed in the middle of the night, and will stay with us and while we ring these birds, sometimes until 3 in the morning. So that's kind of whiz through of the patch. But in terms of patch watching, my patch is only 1.65 kilometers squared. You do need something to keep the interest going. And one of the ways I've found to do this is my blog, which is now called Druridge Diary. I started the blog back in 2007, and I've been keeping a blog ever since. It just helps to keep me enthused and keep me going back to the site, somewhere to put my photographs and hopefully get other people interested in birds and wildlife and bird watching and in the patch itself. The other thing that keeps me going is a year list. I've been keeping a year list since 2002. And I've got this very colourful spreadsheet with all of my year lists on it. Last year was my best year list ever. I think the lockdown and the lack of foreign holidays helped, and that was 175 species in a year, which was pretty good going. The patch total for me is 251 species of bird, and I think the patch total overall is about 267 or something like that. There's quite a few species I haven't seen that others have. So it's just a competition with myself, but it is certainly something that keeps me going. The other thing that's broadened my interest in the patch is the purchase of a macro lens for my SLR camera. I've been able to get out and use the macro lens, and my new passion on the site when bird watching is quiet during the summer months is hoverflies. Started getting into hoverfly photography and identification. They're tricky things to identify, but there's a great lot of support out there. But they're fantastic creatures. But it's not just hoverflies. All sorts of things I never even knew existed, like this wasp beetle that I photographed last year. And I never knew there were so many of these cardinal beetles. The right time of year, they're all over Druridge. Amazing creatures. And things like this spiky shield bug, which was dismantling this caterpillar. So macro photography is really taken over my activities in the summer months, and I spend myself looking down more than looking up nowadays. But I still do look up, and it's the thrill of a rare bird on the patch that really keeps me going. Every day when I'm there, there's just a chance that something rare is going to turn up, like this beta, European beta, turned up a few years ago. Still the best bird I've ever seen on the patch, even though it's a bird I've seen thousands, tens of thousands of in the likes of Spain, but still, what a bird for the patch. It's the hope of rare birds and finding rare birds that also keeps me going. This is a real birder's bird. This isn't a gaudy beta. This is one of the best birds we've found at Druridge. This is a Blythe reed warbler. Bird we found last autumn, very skulking, small, little brown job, as they're known. Very difficult to identify, and some work went into nail on the identification of this bird, but a great bird for the patch. So, but things are always changing as well. Things are always changing. This is a Chetty's warbler. We ringed the first one 3 years ago. It's the only one we've ringed. We expected that they might start to breed pretty soon thereafter. They're breeding elsewhere in Northumberland, and we thought, well, the habitat's great at Druridge. They haven't yet, but I'm sure they will. So things are changing. Spoonbill, a bird now that's its annual on the patch, in increasing numbers. Is it just a matter of time before we have breeding spoonbills somewhere on Druridge Bay and at Druridge Pools maybe? And you never know. You never know what might come next. How long are we away from white storks? The habitat's perfect for them. They just need to colonize. Maybe I should go and put a platform up, just on the chance that we might get white stork coming to breed at Druridge Pools. We can only hope. So as the sun sets on another day over the Cheviot Hills, this is taken from the big dune at Druridge. You can see vast areas of Northumberland from the top of this big dune. One of these days I will see a red kite from the top of here. I haven't yet, but in the meantime, I'll just keep trying, and I'll still be there most days and to see another sunset. So thank you for listening. If you want to keep in touch, the blog is druridgediary.com. You can email me there if you have any questions. Also, if you want to see the sightings from Druridge, all my bird sightings go on eBird, and all of my other sightings are iNaturalist for things like the hoverflies and butterflies and plants and fungus and all that kind of stuff. So thank you very much for listening. Good night.